In this video, we're going to be covering two artists, Hraach and DAVI. I think I'm saying that right, Hraach. But seriously, it's Dowden, and in this video, we're going to be covering two really great artists in the organic house and deep house style, and that is Hraach and DAVI. So for DAVI and Hraach's tracks, we have these really nice, groovy, deep bass lines. The drums are full of little nuances and tiny details that carry the loop so far, and they sound like this. And last, we have our synths that are carrying the vibe of the track a lot more and give the track its full identity, and they sound like this. If you're unfamiliar with either of those artists, DAVI is signed to such labels as Tribes of, All Day I Dream, Crosstown Rebels, and Sudbeat, while Hraach is signed to labels such as Humaidas, I think I'm saying that right, Soul Selectas, and also Sudbeat. They both produce a similar style of really deep but melodic and really interesting tracks. As per usual, there will be a download link in the description below for you to download the samples used in this video, the project file, and any of the presets. If you're new to the channel, make sure to hit the subscribe button so that you get notifications for videos like this one. And just want to give a special shout out because this was voted in by my patrons on Patreon. So if you are not already a patron, you can go ahead and click the link in the description and you actually get to vote what my next how to make music videos are going to be. Okay, so we're going to dive into this, and the way that I'm going to do this is that I'm going to go through every layer that I've done inside the track. I didn't want to start from absolute scratch and recreate the track because it would just take too much time. So I've left in the MIDI information, and I want to give you the best product possible. So I've left in all the drums that I've programmed as well. And I'm going to go through every single step of the track and explain how I got there, what I used, how I used it, and why I used it, essentially. And it's just, I find the best way to teach you how to use these sounds when you're writing your own tracks. I have the kick here, pretty self-explanatory, just a kick drum on every beat. Really light EQing on there, and let's just jump right into the bass. So the bass has 4 different layers here. The 4th bass is more of just like a fill, but when you're creating these bass lines for tracks like this deep house, organic house style, it's a lot of the time these bass lines are staccato, they're broken up, they're very groovy, and sometimes they're sparse and spread really far apart. A lot of the time they'll also use a couple different layers in the bass lines to keep it really interesting and moving it along. I have the first bass layer, sounds like this. Second bass layer sounds like this. And then I have this third bass layer that comes in once in a while. And I'm going to go through all 3 of these synths and how to make them very easily. So I'm going to just grab a new serum, delete this one, and drag and drop that in. First, I'm going to put my filter on, change this to 24. And if you don't have serum, you can use this on a different synth as well. It's a pretty basic patch, and you know, if you just want to use Wavetable or any other synth that you have, it's really easy to follow along. I will include the presets as well, so don't worry if you you know, don't want to make this yourself, but it is very simple. So I'm going to bring the octave down to, turn on oscillator B, sawtooth again, bring that down 1. I'm going to put the cutoff to about 9 o'clock. Resonance can stay there, that's fine. My envelope here, I'm just going to put onto the cutoff. So I'll put envelope 2 onto the cutoff here, and put it on B so that the filter is actually filtering out both oscillator and B. And then I'm going to dial this back until it sounds like a nice pluck sound. So I'm going to bring my decay down to about 400 or 500. Sustain down. It's pretty bassy, but I want a little bit of high end as well. Maybe a little bit of release on both the cutoff filter envelope and the release on the amplitude envelope. And maybe just a little bit of sustain. Do that with the kick. And we can take a quick look at the MIDI here. Really, really simple. So on the 16ths here. But because we are hitting on the same note as the kick, want to make sure that I have my sidechain compression on. So I'll just, I have some multiband dynamics on here as well, just to tame the high end and really compress everything together. But this is the important part here, the sidechain compression. So my kick, when it hits, it is going to compress that sound and really allow that kick to punch through the mix. Let's go on to the second bass. What I actually did is just duplicated the first one. So I'll grab that, drag and drop that onto the second bass, and then I just increased the release a little bit. And this is going to make it so that it's just a little bit different, but nothing too different. But just by increasing that release and making it more of a tail end sound, we can hear how it's different. Maybe a little bit more cutoff. So I've increased the release. I've put up the cutoff just a little bit. The release will put out around 1.5 seconds on both the envelope of the attack and the cutoff. And maybe bring the cutoff up just a little bit more as well. And let's hear the bass now with the kick with those two. Pretty groovy, sounds pretty good. Okay, so it's pretty simple. We're just taking the first bass layer and we're duplicating it and changing it just slightly to make it a bit more interesting. I'm gonna do that one more time, just show you that you don't need to create a new patch every single time. For this example, I'm going to just duplicate the bass again, just by dragging and dropping it onto the new channel here and going in and making some other parameter changes. So I have my octave down to 2. This one I'm gonna bring down to 2 as well. And then I'm going to change this one. We'll go to bipole underscore harmonic. And the second one, I'm just going to bring over to, sure, we'll just try this one out. And we have pretty much the same parameters. Maybe I'm going to reduce the release just a tiny bit on both. And maybe bring the cutoff a little bit up. And let's take a listen to that now by itself. It's still pretty similar to the original sound, so I'm going to tweak this even more with some frequency modulation. So I'm going to turn this on FM from B, and then I'm going to increase this amount. And actually, before I do that, I'm going to actually bring these voices up a little bit. So now the unison is going to be at 3, and the detune I'm going to bring down, almost all the way down to the bottom. And now you're going to hear the difference when I play this. You'll hear as I bring in the FM, you're going to get more of a metallic-y resonant sound. And maybe we can bring up that cutoff just a tiny bit more. So it's more of a pluck sound. And there we go. So it's a little bit of a different sound now. And let's listen to all 3 of those together with the kick. Cool. Maybe turn the cutoff down a little bit on this. It's a little bit too aggressive. And we can move on to the next step. So I'm going to come back to these right here. I won't do this right now. I'm going to come back to it once we establish a little bit more of the track. Oh, one more thing I want to add to this bass is actually a little bit of delay just to the high end. So I'm going to add a delay plugin. I'm going to drag that on there. And I'm just going to add it to the high end, just like this. Let's move on to the drums. So we have quite a bit going on in the drums here. I've taken off the effects of all the drums just to let you hear them dry, and this is the loop on its own. There's quite a few elements going on, and the real beauty of these tracks is that they have so much energy in the percussion, but it's not overbearing, and it's so groovy, and there's so many little details that you can pick up on, and that little details that you don't pick up on, but they are there, and that's really what brings that track and elevates that track to being so professional sounding, and allowing you to be able to listen to that song and not have so many leads and things like that come in, but more of a vibe, because they have all these little nuances and these little things that are keeping the ear interested. So that's where a lot of this really, really good quality stuff comes from. The first hi-hat, I wanted to keep it really nice and tight sounding, really straightforward hat. And the shakers, a lot of the time in these tracks, are a little bit quieter and a little bit, shorter as well. They're just there to accent the empty space. I have the hi-hat. I'm going to go in. I have it just on the off beats here, and I'll solo that so you can hear it. So that's just the basic hi-hat, very, very simple. But to make it even more groovy, I've added the second hat. So you can see here, it's actually just the first hat. I've duplicated that and I've changed the pitch of it. I've gone down 5 semitones and I've faded out a little bit as well. And then I have gone in and actually added just these little accents here. So just add these little accents, and these little accents are going to make it a little bit more interesting just by adding, you know, a couple here and there. It's much groovier, and all I've done is added these 2 little 16th notes here. Moving on to the second hat, I have on the 16ths, but it's going around the offbeats. So it's going around where the hi-hats are coming in on the first one, and I'll solo just the shaker there. Very, very quiet velocity. I've reduced the velocity quite a bit. And again, keeping these interesting, I have the velocities a little bit different on every note that's hitting. Just gone in and manually changed the MIDI on all these by just clicking differently on all these. So you can see that I can change it just like this. I'm just going like this and then Control-Zing so that you can see what it does. And just by putting it in manually, it makes it a bit more organic. It makes it a bit more authentic sounding because you're not hitting the same every single time. It tricks the ear to thinking that it's not just, you know, very robotic and very repetitive. It sounds more realistic to our ears. But by doing that, it's going to make it less repetitive and more interesting for a longer period of time. Added these hats here, but I've only added it on a couple. And again, that's to accent this hi-hat. So we have the first hi-hat, and we'll bring in the second hi-hat with just the shakers. And you can see that I've faded out that shaker as well so that it's not so long. And then I'm going to add this other hat, and that's going to be the one that's coming in on the some of the offbeats as well to complement and accent that hat. This one's not actually hitting on the offbeat, but it is, again, complementing that groove a little bit. Check out the effects I have on here. I just have some subtle EQ, nothing else so far. Let's go into the tambourine here. So this is just another accent to the sound. So you're seeing a theme here that a lot of these sounds, they aren't the main theme of the track. They're not the main idea of the track. They are just there to offer quality to that drum loop, to add more value to that drum loop. So I'm going to just take a listen here. Right? Put that together with the hats. Right? That little subtle bit makes it just a little bit more interesting, but I'm actually going to grab a delay. I'm going to throw that on there, and we're going to have that fade out a little bit. And I'm going to put it on to the 2 here, feedback down quite a bit, and dry wet down quite a bit. Just to give it a little bit more swing, a little bit more to it. But it sounds pretty groovy. It sounds interesting enough that it can be repeated a long time without being too boring. I'm going to go one more thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go to hi-hat 1 and I'm going to add a vocoder onto there. And you may have seen this in my other videos, a trick that I like to do on my hats, and I'm going to just drag that on. Make sure that I'm actually dragging on the entire hat here. And I'm going to filter out most of the low end and really rise up on the high end. And the dry wet maybe down to 20 or 25%. I don't want it taking over the whole sound. I just want to complement the sound. And the release, I'm going to leave it about 180, like this. And what's going to happen is that vocoder is going to add a bit of tail end, about 180 milliseconds of tail end to that sound. We can just solo the hat. Maybe a little bit less dry wet. So it's adding a bit of that sizzle you can hear off and on. But I want to add it a little bit more variation to that as well. Again, it's super important to add this variation to really make it interesting for a longer period of time. To really have those details is going to really elevate these tracks. I have the LFO, it's a Max for Live device, and you can click map here. And this is going to, I'm going to map it to the release here. And you can see now that release knob is going buck wild. We don't want that much. We don't want it to sound like that. It's going to sound pretty weird. No bueno. So I'm going to bring the depth down, and that's essentially just the amount the LFO is going to oscillate back and forth. And then I'm going to put the rate down so it's a little bit less erratic, maybe a little faster. And then this is important as well. This is essentially the top and bottom of where you want this effect to move. So you can see it's going all the way up to a second here. I don't want that. I'll bring the 100% down. I want it to go from about 180, 170 to 210, 220. Bring this up a little bit. And that looks all right. We're hitting around 180 to 220. So now when we take a listen, it's very subtle, but it's changing that hat just a little bit every time it hits. It's getting a little longer tail, a little shorter. And that's going to keep us interested subconsciously for a longer period of time. These are the high quality tips I'm giving you right now. So you make sure that you pay attention, okay? Okay, pay attention. Moving on to the toms now. These are going to be really important in carrying the track in both a more obvious way and a subtle way. So the first tom is going to be a little bit more obvious. Got some low end to it that I've filtered out. I'm actually going to push this low end up a little bit here because it's going to kind of complement the bass line. And it's good to be putting these toms in places that are going to add to the groove, add to the bass line. You can actually solo it along with the kick and the bass line. And hear how it adds that groove, it adds that anticipation. That's what we want. We want it to be in a place that it's going to either, if it's competing with the bass line, you want to be removing that low end. But if you put it in a spot that it has that low end where the bass line isn't already hitting, then you're going to be using that tom as a complement to the bass line. So that's really interesting. And it's a really good technique to use. And they do it quite often in music like this. So I have that one that does have the low end. It doesn't have sub, but it has a decent amount of, higher bass here. And then I have this tom, I just duplicated it and I EQ'd out the low end and a little bit of the high end. And you're going to hear how this sounds by itself. I'm just going to move the loop over. Really quiet, really subtle. And you'll hear this a lot in DAVI Hraach's tracks where they do these little ticks and tats and little smacks to sound like writing poetry. These little hits, and they just are so subtle that you don't really hear them until you're really listening for them. Turn this back on and listen with everything else. Listen to all the drums now and see if you can hear that. It's very subtle, but it does add value. So all I did was just duplicated that tom, EQ'd it out. But before I go any further, I want to just mention that it's super important to tune your more tonal instruments and percussive elements like your toms. So the tom here I have, it actually wasn't in E, even though it says that it's E. So the track is actually in D. So I thought that I would just have to go down from an E to a D sharp to a D, but really I actually had to go up one semitone because it was in a C sharp. So that's really important to do. The way that you can do that is using EQ. Up here is the D. So it's about in a D, and I just fine-tuned that tom so that it was in the right key, and only really if it holds tonal weight. If it doesn't have as much tonal weight, and what that really means is that it carries a pitch, that it carries a strong pitch you can really pick up on. Usually it's more resonant, and maybe it's a little bit longer of a sound that you can pick up on the pitch, but you should be able to tell right away if it's not in key. Moving on to the bongo here. So this is actually, I'll show you how I did this. I'll show in browser. I took this loop here. I dragged it in and I just cut out a piece of that loop and I used it in here. You can hear this one. Adding more value to that loop, keeping it interesting. Let's go ahead to the next one. Again, I just took part of that loop. Nice little hit sound. It's going to add even more value. And you can hear and notice that all these sounds are adding groove. They are not just placed randomly, they're placed in positions that are giving you some sort of anticipation and making you feel that groove. And it's really important to be placing them strategically, so you're not just dropping them wherever, but every time you put in a sample, make sure that it's adding value to the loop. I can't stress that enough. Then we have the claps here. So I have two claps that are just the same. One is transposed 12 semitones up, and it's just slightly off the grid here. So you can see that the one clap is just a little bit off, and that's to give it this wider, duplicated sound. So let's listen to both together, and then just one by itself. It's just giving it a bit more depth. It's giving it a bit more weight behind it, and a little bit more high end. Okay, and before we listen to the loop one more time, I do have one other percussive element here. This perk here, what I did is I took this percussion, I reversed it, and shortened it over to this side as well, and we can just take a listen to that by itself. Really, really simple sound. Really quiet. Maybe turn that up a little bit, actually. I'm going to add one more element to the drum loop, but it's not actually a percussive element per se, and I want you to get thinking about using other ideas for your drum loops. They don't have to just be percussion. They don't have to just be drums. I'm actually going to use this little pluck preset that is going to add a little bit of value as well. So let's just listen to it by itself. It's kind of percussive sound. It's plucky. I'm going to add some EQ and some reverb on there. But it has a pitch to it. It's in key with the track, and it's going to add a little bit of identifying melody to the drum loop. So even if you only hear the drum loop by itself, it's going to carry a little bit more of a harmonic weight to it, I guess. So let's listen one last time to all the drums with the addition of this little pluck that I have. Cool, right? So in this style of deep house and organic house, sometimes we'll have real organic and authentic sounding instruments. Sometimes they'll have a little bit more electronic sounding instruments. So I've done a combination of both. I've noticed that in a lot of DAVI Hraach's tracks, they have a lot of strings and a lot of pads that really set the tone and the mood of the track. I have this massive preset that I'm going to use. I just grabbed one called Come Upstairs. It's a really nice pad. I'm just going to, just show you the MIDI information here. It's just playing on the D3, and then I also have this D2. So usually pads and strings are a little bit higher in the frequency range, but if you add lower notes to your strings and your pads, you get these lower harmonics that can actually kind of muddy up your mix unless you take care of them with some EQ. So let's take a listen to the pad by itself. You can see that I have this lower bass frequency here, and I've rolled off a little bit. But it's adding a little bit of low weight as well. And if I remove that lower note, it doesn't sound as full. It's subtle, but we're adding just a little bit more low end, and it's going to give us a bit more warmth in that section of the track. But again, if we do too much, it could muddy it up, so we just have to be careful and make sure that we're EQing and taking that out. Don't know why I have two reverbs on here, so I'm just going to get rid of that one. And then I also have a delay on here. Okay, moving on to the second pad. This pad is going to give us a bit more of expression in the track. It's going to give the track more of a vibe than this ambient pad here. This ambient pad is more to fill up the spectrum and kind of glue all the elements together, just a really slight amount, whereas this fill pad is going to be more of a artistic idea, where it's going to be bridging the gap between the loop and the vibe of the track using a couple of different chords. So it's just two different chords. And it goes from the D, or I guess it's not really chords, just notes with an octave. So it's the D3 and the D4, and then it just goes down to the A, the A2 and the A3. And you just take a listen to that. I've used another preset because I have no problem using presets as long as I'm tweaking them a little bit, like I've mentioned before. And for the sake of the video, I wouldn't just grab presets and just throw them on all my tracks, but these pads are really, really great. They're really organic sounding. Try and tweak them a little bit like I have. But yeah, let's take a listen to it. And just those two notes are going to give you an idea of what the track is kind of going to sound like in terms of, the feeling of it. If it's a minor scale, if it's a major scale, if it's uplifting, or if it's sad, this is giving it just a little touch of that. And a really important thing to note is that all the velocities here are different. So what I did is actually recorded it live on my fancy little keyboard here. So instead of just writing out the MIDI information, if you have a keyboard and you're recording like this, you're going to have a little bit of, wiggle room. You're going to make either not necessarily mistakes, but you're not going to press the keys the same way every single time. and this gives it an even more realistic feel. So I encourage you to actually record things live. And if you can't record things live, then you can, go in and change these parameters, switch them around a little bit, move them left and right a little bit, start them and stop them at different times, change the velocities, and that will make it sound much more organic and more interesting. So now we've established kind of the vibe of the track. We're going to add a couple lead sounds to it to really make the track feel complete and to keep it interesting. So I only have a couple more things to add to this track that are going to finalize the ideas behind it and really give it its own identity. So now that we have the vibe of the track figured out, we have a really good drum loop that's really interesting and it's going to maintain the interest for a long time. We can start to build out the track. So I already have laid out a pretty solid arrangement here, and this is the first section that we're going to take a listen to. It's just going to be the bass, the drums, and the melody, and then we're going to start building out this way using the extra little things that I have here and also this bass that I mentioned earlier. So let's just go ahead and take a listen as is right now. And if you're paying attention to the synth here, you can actually hear how that last note was a little bit more, it felt a bit more aggressive, a little bit louder because of those velocity changes. So that's why it's so important, because the harder I'm hitting these keys or the lighter I'm pressing these keys when I'm recording it, they will sound different every single time, especially if the patch or the preset that you're using allows for differences in velocity ranges. That's good so far, but we need to add some things that are going to continue the track and build the track out. So the first thing I have is this little bass lead, and it's a very identifiable sound from one of DAVI's tracks called Definition. That's where I got the idea. And that's also where I got the idea for the vocal that I'm going to bring in right after this. What I did was I duplicated this sound once more, and let's go ahead and do that. Just drag and drop that in. And in this bass patch, all I'm going to do is just really increase the cutoff a little bit more. And I'll put some delay on this as well. Just in the high end, a little bit of feedback, that's good. And let's push the FM up a little bit more. And the cutoff a little bit more. Maybe the release a little bit more. And let's put the drive up a little bit as well. And then I'm going to EQ out some of that low end because I really don't want that to fill up the spectrum too much. Maybe push the high end up a tiny bit. Okay, cool. And let's go down to the vocals that I put in. So my fiance actually gave me this idea when she came in. We're learning German right now, and I just literally said 2 random phrases in German that just say, like excuse me, kind of sorry, and the wind is cold. So that is just super random, and this is what it sounds like. Oh, I've also down pitched it 5 semitones because my regular voice doesn't sound as cool as when you down tune it a couple semitones. So
Der Wind ist kalt. Entschuldigung. Der Wind.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so I'm just gonna grab these. I'm gonna throw some delay and reverb on there. Pretty long decay time. I'm gonna bring the dry wet to about 50%. Feedback down and dry wet on the delay down. I don't want too much delay, and I'm just going to throw those. Let's put that here and there, and the guitar pluck is already there, so I'm going to move it over maybe here, and then I'm just going to duplicate that. The guitar pluck. So guitar pluck is just a patch that I had, and I just recorded it and played a little lick, just bounced it out to audio, and then I EQ'd out this a little bit. You'll hear why. I'm just going to play it for you. Kind of helps with it a bit. And then I'm going to do the same thing, just some I'll grab this delay and reverb and drag and drop that onto the guitar pluck. Last but definitely not least are these strings that I grabbed. It's just a synthetic string patch, comes with Ableton, and I just threw some delay and reverb on there, and I just recorded myself playing some chords. If you want to make chords like these, just start with one simple triad, 3 notes, and then just add in a 4th with your pinky or your thumb, maybe your other hand, and adding in just different notes that are in the key, and you can get some really interesting and melodic and emotional sounding chords. The way that I wrote it, it's building up as it comes into the breakdown, and then as the breakdown happens, it kind of fades back out to single notes, and that just kind of brings the tension up, and then it kind of drops it back down and allows the track to, continue on without having so much anticipation that there's all these strings. Also, I'm going to grab this guitar pluck, and I'm going to duplicate it, and then reverse the second one. And nice little trick that I like to do to kind of lead into a drop is a reverse effect here. So it's going to, maybe not that much, maybe just a few notes here. And it sounds like this. Okay, and now when it kind of goes into that drop, you're going to anticipate it a little bit because it's doing that reverse. I'll quickly let you listen to what the strings sound like, and I'll also keep the guitar in there. And I've also put the vocals out like this, so you can hear what the vocals sound like. And just take a listen. I'm going to cut out a lot of that low end. Those vocals are super low. And turn them up a bit. And turn the delay up as well. So you hear those melodic elements coming together. We have the vocals that make it a little bit more interesting. We can take a quick peek with the rest of the track. And of course, we have this bass note that I forgot to touch on. So by itself, and then with the rest of the track. It adds another layer, another accent. It keeps it interesting. The way that I have the track arranged is just that it's going to play for these 3 sections here. And obviously it's a short version of a track. Right around here, I'm going to filter out the low end of the kick. And the way that I do that is by grabbing an EQ and automating this first parameter here. So I'm going to show automation. And at 33, I'm going to bring this up to about maybe 200-ish, 220, 250, right around there, 230, 230. And then after a few bars of that, I'm going to bring it out of the breakdown completely, allow the track to breathe a little bit, and build back up into the drop. And it's going to bring everything back in together to kind of complete the idea of the track. So I'm just going to duplicate this over so it plays for a little bit longer. And I'll have my vocals go a little bit longer. And then I'm going to duplicate this pad as well. And there we go. There is the basic outline of the track. I have the guitar plucks there. I have the vocals there. I'm going to turn those on. That one on. And now that everything is together, I'm just going to do one final thing, and that's just going to be adding a slight impact. I'm going to grab one of the hi-hats, and I'm going to make a really subtle impact from it just by dragging and dropping it into my big effects here. So I'll drag and drop it there, and I'm going to copy that, and just going to consolidate here so that it looks a little longer. And then I'm going to drag and drop it there, and I'll drag and drop it on these just to give it a little bit of white noise and a slight impact. The big effects here just has a lot of reverb. We got 10 seconds almost of decay time. And this is going to just help the drops and the transitions sound a little bit more, they transition a little nicer when there's a bit of white noise there. A lot of the times in Hraach and DAVI's tracks, they add little leads that come and go just once or twice throughout the track. And I'm just going to add in a little bit of one that I've made in this wavetable. All I've done is taken the wavetable patch, added some delay and reverb, and pushed this wavetable up a little bit from the sine into more of a triangle wave to give it a bit of harmonic content. So enjoy the track, and you'll see as it's playing out where I record. Let's go. making some touch-ups here in the mix. Not bad. That's how I dance in clubs, just so you know. And that's it. Not bad, not bad. All right, thanks so much everybody for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something. Make sure to grab the project file and samples and the presets. The link is in the description below. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe, notifications on so you get more videos like this one. And if you enjoyed the video, also give me a thumbs up. It helps us out tremendously. And hey, if you want to comment below in the comment section as well, let me know who you want me to cover in the next videos. I will take that into consideration, and I will see you next time.